let's hear from Carl. So when we first talked, you said you heard that there was this local opposition.
Yeah, without the local opposition, Loretta, I wouldn't have been brought in on the project. The chemist who wrote my part, what he wrote would have survived.
And that's the first draft, right?
Yeah, and then they realized they were going to have trouble with the local population if they didn't get somebody who was at least, I knew nothing about, I'd been to New York City, but I knew nothing about the Hudson Valley and knew nothing about Hudson River School painters, never heard of church.
So you get this assignment, and then what happened?
I went to the Google of the day, the Reader's Guide to Periodic Literature. And I'm at work and looked up Frederick Church, and it said something about Life magazine, and it was you know, like 10 or 12 pages or something. And I thought, oh, well, that's a big article. It's not just a mention. And so I stopped at the Oak Ridge Public Library on the way home, and think of a small town, this is 30,000 people, public library. How many people used to subscribe to Life magazine and then get rid of their old issues? So I looked up the issue and I found it, and I asked them if I could check it out overnight because I wanted to show it to my management at work. And they said, oh, you can have that one.
Does everybody know what he's talking about with the Life magazine article? How it was in the 60s. It was at the same time that Olana was being saved.
Yeah, it was a 14-page thing with a centerfold and all, and it was of the view of the house. And
so you got the magazine?
Yeah, that's when I knew that this guy was not just some 19th century artist, that he was a person of some import. And then I think I called Theodore Stebbins at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Yeah. And as I was young and naive and just, well, if you want to know something, you just call the curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and ask them, or Boston Museum of Fine Arts, or at the National Gallery, and you find out. So I called, and the first thing out of his mouth when I explained why I was calling was, I know a senator, what can I do? And that,
but you called the right guy, right?
Yeah, then I knew that, yeah, we had stepped in something. and needed to, yeah, this was going to, and then it just snowballed from there. Yeah.
So what art historians did you end up contacting?
So I did contact John Wilmerding, that's the National Gallery, and Wilmerding, he really pushed that I talk to David Huntington at Michigan, and being a Michigan alumnus, that was easy to do and to arrange, and eventually went there to talk to Michigan faculty about other aspects of working on the project, and went to his office and interviewed him. The problem that I had later was that I probably wasn't smart enough about what I was dealing with when I talked to him, that it would have been better if I knew, you know, when I became more informed later in the project. But he was very gracious, very helpful, and was pointed me in the direction of this deeper meaning of what the views from Olana and Olana itself means, what they meant at that time in American history. And if we lose that, we lose that. It's rare to have anything from the 19th century really survive in a way that you can still pick that up. And he said, and the quotes that these different curators gave me were all just so effusive about the importance of this strange remnant of American 19th century history that is the mid-Hudson Valley.
So Rick, you want to talk about the hearings up in Albany and what they were looking at up there?
Well, the hearings, this is starting to be ancient history, but I do remember this was a joint hearing, federal judges and state judges, and the Power Authority witnesses were the first parade of witnesses, and there were, I think, weeks of cross-examination of their star witness, who, Dr. Stone, he expressed real indifference about the place.
He was a landscape architect, right?
I think he was a planner, but he was functioning as a landscape architect.
Right, okay. He was purporting to be, all right.
Exactly.
But I gotta say, you know, the discipline of aesthetics, environmental aesthetics, there are so many disciplines involved. Usually you think of landscape architects as carrying the ball, well, yeah, but you ought to know the physics of light, you should know psychology, you should know planning, you should know a host of disciplines that are involved. And nobody I know, and I've been involved in this discipline since the 70s. Nobody that I've ever met or been introduced to has that complete package. And today, you better know virtual reality as well, because the computers are taking over all of the technical parts of the discipline. And and back then, it was even worse. We didn't even know what disciplines were involved. It was in those days, at least we had a painting. We had some evidence that this was a very special place. But there was very, very little else that we could deal with, that we could use. Carl did some great work interviewing people to find out attitudes and perceptions. That's early work in the discipline. And there was a very skeptical series of judges. They didn't understand the discipline any more than most anybody else. And so we had to have a fierce objectivity. I removed myself from the local population because that would be considered biased. Carl embraced it, so we might have had different approaches to it, but as a New York State regulator, I could not, never did align myself with any local communities. When I was against the project, I had lots of friends, and when I was for a project, I had lots of enemies. But, go ahead.
That whole being at a national laboratory, and Dorothy's been at a federal commission, you're paid the same whatever project you're working on, and that's the difference between getting a university consultant, say, on your side, and getting somebody like Oak Ridge on your side, because it's the same salary. You can't bias, and you can't bias a bias, and so it's comfortable for us and it's comfortable for everybody, and that's. If you wonder why, we've had several presidential candidates on the Republican side recommend the abolishing the Department of Energy, and that's one of the things you lose when you do that.
Rick, your boss and my boss, Bob Flack, was on the siting board. Did that cause any awkwardness for you at all, or were you just there as a technical witness for the agency?
Well, I can remember one incident with Bob Flack that I think was revealing. And I was walking down the hall, and one of the alternative sites for the Power Authority's fossil application was Athens. And so the same issues of Olana were before us, and he asked me what I thought about that. And he should not have done that. That's inappropriate contact with a DEC staff witness and a decision maker. So I looked at him, and I had to think very quickly, what do I say? And I said, well, if you can't build it at the facility at the Arthur Kill site in New York City, you can't build it anywhere. He looked at me and says, that's my position too. And that was the exchange, inappropriate exchange we had. But that's, I think that said a lot about Bob Flack.
He and I never had an exchange on the subject, needless to say.
So when you came to find out at some point what was going on with the hearings and how New York State basically changed course, or the Power Authority changed course, can you talk about that?
Well, the timing is kind of interesting, and we need to look into it more to be sure that we're right in the assertion. But at a certain point, it became, I think, evident to John Dyson, who was chairman of the Power Authority, and his master, Hugh Carey, the governor, that this was not going to go forward at the federal level. And it was just after that point that an executive in the State Parks Office under Commissioner Aaron Lehman wrote a letter to Scenic Hudson, which I found in the files, saying, we absolutely will, I've got it here somewhere, that I think it's worth just quoting the very strong language. Her name was Nancy Tobin. She was an assistant commissioner. And she said, this office will strongly and vociferously oppose this project, and we are now pulling together information on the importance of the site, meaning Olana, and the artistic and creative work of Church and so forth. Well, you might ask, where have they been for 2 years? But they function in a hierarchy, and I think that we should be grateful that they came around, and at the end, the resolution that we desired was achieved.
Well, we've seen some of the letters or the memos internally, and there was a lot of pressure from the staff on Orrin Lehman to do something, but he didn't want to cross the government. But. Now, what was the significance of Olana being on the National Registry or being an NHL, a National Historic Landmark?
Well, by virtue of that designation, it had legal standing. It was by that a measure of its universally held values. If a place is beautiful and it's not designated, then you can't convince a judge to protect that place. You're not going to get anywhere. But Olana being on the register and furthermore a National Historic Landmark property, which is a higher designation, that gets decision makers' attention. It gets the law requires special attention to be placed on places like that. And Olana, and you should know, not every historic building, even if it's on the register, requires special attention. It means it's a candidate for that. There are places that are on the register, might be there for reasons of documents being signed, not be any value of architecture or landscape architecture or anything else. But Olana is a place where the view is so intimately attached to its values, not just the architecture. It's a beautiful structure, of course, but there is no other place in New York like that. Olana is and stands by itself, probably nationally, I would say. I can't swear to that, but I could put my hand up and almost swear.
So when you found out at some point they dropped the idea, can you talk about that? Your conversation with Bob Stover?
Well, yes, Bob Stover, when Bob Stover learned of the action in Washington, that is to say, Carl's material being received and approved by the staff of the NRC and a recommendation going forward to the commission itself that this project be blocked. I don't know if it was exclusively on aesthetics, but the implication that we got was that it was largely because of this, and he was quite certain that it would not go forward in Albany. There was no way that it could. So he called me and he said, we've won. There will be no power plant, no nuclear power plant at Cement. And I said, well, when did the commission rule on this? And he said, well, they didn't rule. It's just been withdrawn and Kerry is going to kill it. And I said, but we haven't made law. We have to make law if this is going to affect power plants all over the country. And he said, you are an impossible client. I'm telling you, we've won.